My name is Darrell Barnes and welcome to my science channel. Right now we're going to talk about digestion and nutrition, a few clinical aspects. Not so much on nutrition, but just enough to kind of make digestion seem relevant. I guess that's a good way to say it. Remember, if you're in my class, to study the highlighted material. That way we can all agree on what's on the test. And if you have another teacher, remember to study what they want you to study, because that's important. We want to do the important things. When we talk about digestion, ingestion begins in the mouth for most of us, and mastication is actually chewing. We have incisors, canines, and molars that help us do that process. Remember that we have primary teeth, which are called deciduous. Deciduous just means that they fall out. And here where I live in Mississippi, I live in a temperate deciduous forest. Basically what that means is that the leaves fall off in the fall. So this same principle of deciduous is what we have when we lose our teeth. Our secondary teeth are our permanent teeth. When we look briefly at the anatomy of a tooth, the top part is the crown, the bottom part is the root. We have enamel, dentin, and pulp. And there is a periodontal ligament that holds this tooth firmly into the jaw. There are hormones secreted in the digestive system. We're going to talk about some of those as we go along. When we talk about movement through the digestive tract, it's smooth muscle that makes this happen. And fortunately, we don't have to think about it for smooth muscle to function. We eat a burger and our body gets the good stuff out of it and then gets rid of the other stuff later. When we talk about mechanical digestion, we're talking about chewing and churning. So we have teeth and stomach action here. Chemical digestion begins in the mouth with salivary amylase, which helps to digest carbs. There are different salivary glands. The parotid gland secretes 25 to 30% of the saliva. Sublingual glands about 5%. Submandibular 65 to 70%. I thought this was kind of interesting. In saliva, it's obvious that we have water and we also have mucus. That's pretty obvious, but the rest of it is maybe not quite so intuitive. We have electrolytes, sodium, chlorine. Amylase is how we get carb digestion beginning in the mouth. Lysozyme is a chemical that helps in bacterial destruction. IgA is an antibody that helps get rid of some pathogens, and bicarbonate also helps to neutralize acid in our mouth. Interesting. In digestion, we also have absorption. A lot of this happens in the duodenum as far as nutritionally, water absorbed in the large intestine, but also through other parts of the intestine as well. Defecation is going to the bathroom, and we get rid of feces when we do that. Let's talk about layers of the digestive system for a moment. The inner opening or inside of your intestine is called the lumen. There is a mucosa, submucosa, muscular layer, and then a serosa. I thought it's also kind of interesting that even between the layers of mucosal lining, you have a muscular layer here. The external muscular layers appear to be a little bit more profound. There are circular layers that help for contraction this way, and then longitudinal for contraction along the length of the intestine. The serosa is oftentimes also called the visceral peritoneum. So let's go over and talk about peritoneum for just a few minutes. The parietal peritoneum is what lines the inner surface of the body. And if we have an infection in that, it's called peritonitis. The visceral peritoneum is formed when the parietal peritoneum folds upon itself on the organ that we are talking about. This visceral peritoneum is also called the serosa. Remember that. We said that earlier, but wanting to get that back into our head. The kidneys are retroperitoneal. They're kind of glued up against the back of your body cavity. There are intraperitoneal organs. The intestines are located within the peritoneum. As the visceral peritoneum surrounds internal organs, it also forms mesenteries. We know that mesenteries are for support of the small and large intestines. They serve as routes for blood vessels, nerves, and lymph, and the mesentery associated with the large intestine is called mesocolon. There is also a greater omentum that is in front of the intestines. It forms a large apron and is also a big repository for fat. So we're not just fat on the outside where we can pinch it, but we're also sometimes endowed with adipose tissue inside. As food leaves the mouth through the oropharynx and then the laryngopharynx, it proceeds down the esophagus. There is an upper and a lower gastroesophageal sphincter. And then as the bolus or the food moves down the esophagus, it penetrates through the diaphragm. The esophagus penetrates through the diaphragm. The top sphincter in the stomach is called the cardiac sphincter. The lower sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, is what releases chyme into the small intestine. There is a fundus. The top portion of the stomach is called the fundus, and sometimes this can herniate up through the diaphragm, and it is called a hiatal hernia. Now that takes us back to the bottom of the board. Gastroesophageal reflux disease is caused by a number of different things. It can be caused by Helicobacter pylori, can be caused by a hiatal hernia, but one of the irritations that I think of is simply the food that we eat. There is a blood type diet, and it is based on the idea that some foods that we eat act as medicine, some as food, and some as poison. For instance, tomato paste seems to irritate a lot of people in the stomach area and give irritation. So it might behoove us to think wisely and to try to see if there is a food-based solution to our stomach problem. It may not be that simple, but it might be nice to check this out first before we hit the panic button, possibly. In the stomach, there are several chemicals that we need to think about. Parietal cells in the stomach secrete hydrochloric acid, which is important to convert pepsinogen into pepsin. That helps us to begin breaking down protein in the stomach in an acid environment. Pepsinogen is secreted by chief cells in the stomach. Enteroendocrine cells of the stomach secrete gastrin, and those in turn promote hydrochloric acid release from parietal cells. Let's go over and talk for a few minutes about the small intestine. The small intestine is about 20 feet long, consists of the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum, and then the ileum connects to the cecum of the large intestine through the ileocecal valve. We say that the duodenum is the initial segment of the small intestine. There is a duodenal papilla that receives bile from the gallbladder. Remember, it's cholecystokinin that causes the gallbladder to contract, and the gallbladder is important because it helps to emulsify fats. CCK also relaxes the sphincter into the duodenum so that the bile can easily go into the duodenum. Acinar cells of the pancreas secrete digestive enzymes, which then go into the duodenum through the duodenal papilla. Enterocytes are the cells that line the small intestine. They have little tiny microvilli on them which help increase surface area. These are positioned on villi, which have capillaries and lacteals inside. The capillaries are what help us absorb carbohydrates and proteins in their simple form, and the lacteals help us absorb fats. Remember that protein digestion occurs in the stomach in an acidic environment. As the proteins get into the duodenum, and as the duodenum detects these digested proteins, secretin is released. This triggers and tells the stomach, hey, stop sending us so much stuff down here, we have enough already. Bicarbonate ion secretion is important from the pancreas to help neutralize the chyme that's coming from the stomach into the duodenum, and this also, secretin also helps to increase bile production. Bile is produced in the liver, and as it is released through hepatic ducts, which form the common hepatic duct. Some of this bile may be stored in the gallbladder, but when it is released from the gallbladder, it goes through the cystic duct. Notice that the common bile duct, which is the merging of the cystic duct and the common hepatic duct, also merges with the pancreatic duct. Remember, there are acinar cells in the pancreas that help release digestive enzymes. As the pancreatic duct and the common bile duct merge, they unite to form the hepatopancreatic sphincter, and then these digestive enzymes and emulsification agents are released into the duodenal area through the duodenal papilla. Interestingly, the pancreas releases trypsinogen, which is catalyzed into trypsin, which allows for protein digestion in an alkaline environment. So the beauty of your digestive system is that not only is protein processed in an acidic environment, but it is also processed in an alkaline environment. That is very beautiful. When we convert over from the small intestine to the large intestine, it occurs through the ileocecal valve. Let's take a look at some of the anatomy. Here's the ileum coming into the cecum, ascending colon, transverse, descending, sigmoid, rectum, and anus. There is also a little worm-like muscle on the large intestine called the Taenia coli, which helps to move food through the intestine. These little pouch things are called haustra, or a haustrum singular. The large intestine is probably very underestimated. Our immune system, vitamins K and B, water absorption, bacteria, all of these are so important for all elements of our health, even our mental health, apparently. Feces is formed here. This is just the unwanted part that our body just kind of gets rid of. Yogurt is one of your number one allies. Eating good food for your body is a number one issue. Also, remember this, our emotional affect, how we live in our minds on a day-to-day basis, also directly affects the health of our stomach, our entire digestive system. So let's try to think good thoughts too. That might help us along the pathway of good digestive health.